So I think Wednesday is now becoming my favorite day of the week because I love reading through some of these hot takes that you guys send me. I actually didn't make a community post this week reminding you guys to send me the hot takes because I already had too many that I wanted to feature in this week's video. And these ones I thought were just too good to pass up. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bull Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Before I get into the hot takes, you probably saw yesterday, it was announced by the team that Wendell Carter Jr. will miss at least 4 weeks due to a severe quad contusion. Now, I believe it was from that freak collision he had in practice with Denzel Valentine, which at first didn't seem to be too serious based on what was reported, but evidently it has worsened since then. And this is a pretty big blow for the Bulls because we really have been struggling in defending the paint and protecting the rim without him in these past 3 games. I know some people aren't a fan of Wendell, but you can't deny that he is a quality defender. And as much as I like Gafford, I've been really high on him. I've been hyping him for a while now, to be honest. He doesn't really fill Wendell's shoes in terms of his overall versatility on defense and as well as offense. I mean, Gafford is mainly just a dunker. He doesn't have much of a post-up game. He doesn't shoot at all. And Wendell has that. But I won't go too in-depth into that. I'll likely have to save that for another video because today we're just focusing on your hot takes. And to kick it off, we have actually 2 takes in one. This is from Kyle Williams. He says, the Bulls poorly utilized their 3 straight 7th picks. Number 7 picks, that is. Not saying any of them are busts, but we probably could have chosen smarter. The second take, Zach Lavine should run point in a Houston Harden MVP year kind of style offense. He's a better facilitator than Kobe, in my opinion. So let me start with the first take. And it's funny because my last video that I uploaded, I talked about how tanking in the NBA is a horrible idea. And I touched on the Bulls' recent draft picks that we got as a result of tanking. So the 3 number 7 picks that you're referring to, that's Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter Jr., and Kobe White. Now, one thing I'll say about the NBA draft, and I said it in my last video, is that it's a bit of a crapshoot. You know, and hindsight is always 20/20 when you look back 5 years later and realize what players you could have drafted. And that doesn't just apply to the Bulls. That goes for any team. 14 teams passed up and missed out on their chance to draft Giannis, case in point. But no one had any idea of the player he would become at the time of the draft. Otherwise, he would have been selected number 1 overall and not Anthony Bennett. But when we look at the 2017 NBA draft, the draft pick the Bulls used to select Markkanen, for where he was selected and what was available on the board at the time, this was actually a decent pick because you have to look at the players that were drafted after him to see who they should have selected instead. I think the main ones that pop out at me are obviously Donovan Mitchell and Bam Adebayo. I'm sure if we had that pick, we would have selected one of those 2. Both of those guys are all-stars, huge impact players on their teams. But that can be said for all the other teams who passed on these guys. It's not just the Bulls. I do still think Markkanen has a lot of long-term potential if he can stay healthy, and he's having a solid season right now compared to how he performed last year. I mean, the Bulls could have selected guys like Frank Ntilikina or Dennis Smith Jr., Malik Monk, so they could have drafted better here, sure, but getting Markkanen at 7, I don't think that was a waste of a pick by any means. It was still a good pick. And the following draft pick, we took Wendell Carter Jr. You know, by the time it was our pick, guys like Luka Doncic and Trae Young, they were already off the board. In hindsight, I mean, you could say Colin Sexton, you know, he went right after Wendell, and obviously he's proven to be a decent player. My favorite, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I'm a huge fan of him. He went after Wendell, and then obviously you have Michael Porter Jr., another really great player, but again, at the time, there were so many concerns and uncertainties about his health, which is why he fell so low into the draft. So I wouldn't really fault the Bulls on that one. So again, I think, you know, with what was available, taking Wendell at that spot wasn't a bad pick. Sure, again, there were some better options that could have fit the lineup better, but not a poorly utilized pick among the options available. And then finally, Kobe White in 2019. So this was the draft that featured Zion and Ja Morant. Obviously, it would have been amazing to snag one of those two, but the Bulls had the number 7 pick, so it wasn't an option. Now, I know Kobe lately hasn't been performing well, and the reactionary response to the decision would be to say this was a bad draft pick by the Bulls. But really, outside of Tyler Hero, I'm not really seeing that many guys that went after Kobe where you would say, oh wow, getting Kobe and selecting Kobe was a mistake over this guy. Because despite this slump Kobe is in, he's still a good player. He's just not in the right position for him. Which, okay, fair, maybe that's partly why it can be seen as a poorly utilized decision to draft him, because why draft Kobe, who is more of a shooting guard than point guard, when you already have Zach Lavine? I mean, there were guys like Rui Hachimura, he's actually looked pretty nice so far this season. Cam Reddish to an extent, PJ Washington, I can see that one. I don't know. The 2019 draft class outside of Zion and Ja was pretty weak. So it's hard for me to say that Kobe was a poorly used pick because there just weren't that many options. Now, for your second take, and I'm probably going to need to move things along a little more quickly since there are others that I want to get to, Lavine should run the point like Harden did in Houston. I mean, I like the concept in theory because I think Lavine has shown to be a decent playmaker when he wants to be. We've seen that most recently. But as good as Lavine is, he's not going to produce like Harden did in that role. As good as Zach is at scoring, he can't score effectively and efficiently as Harden. And he's also not as good at passing as Harden is. On top of that, even as amazing as James Harden is as a player and the role that he played that year when he won the MVP, I mean, it didn't really prove to be all that successful in the long run. It's still very ISO-heavy style basketball, and I personally much prefer team basketball with a lot of ball movement. So I'm going to say no on this one. Next up, we've got Cubs fan with a super hot take. The Bulls will get past the first round of the playoffs. So the first thing that makes this a hot take is the Bulls making the playoffs, period, which is questionable given the way they've been playing without Wendell. And the fact that Wendell isn't just going to miss a game or two, he's going to be out for at least a month. Second, even if the Bulls make the playoffs, which I still think they can, it's likely that they're going to make it towards the bottom of the East standings, in either the 7th or the 8th seed. And the chances of them beating one of the top teams in the East, likely the Bucks or the Nets, is slim to none, unless all of them turn into playoff Rondo overnight. When they get there, I don't see it happening. And keep in mind, most of the guys on this Bulls roster have never even seen a playoff game before in their career. And even if they're playing really well together and gelling really well towards the end of the regular season, that inexperience is going to impact them in the playoffs. So I would say no on the Bulls actually making it past the first round. I think they will eventually, but not this season. Next up, we've got B Cubs coming from our Discord server, which you might want to check out. I'll leave a link in that to the description. He says the next Bulls All-Star is not yet on this team. So, wow, this one is a bit interesting, as I think most people would argue Zach Lavine will be an All-Star, even potentially this season. I'm still not entirely sold on that happening this season unless the Bulls start improving their record to at least above 500, because that is an important factor for how All-Stars are selected, is the overall team performance and their standings at that time. But most people would say, he will become one in the future. I would say the only other ones that have the potential to become future All-Stars, at least in my opinion, are Markkanen and Patrick Williams. Markkanen, if he continues to progress the way that he has so far this season, and then even further with every passing year leading up to his prime, I would say that there's a legitimate chance he makes an All-Star team in the future, potentially multiple All-Star teams. And with Patrick Williams, the fact that he's so young and there's so much potential there, I could see obviously him becoming a future All-Star. But I think your message might be a little more cryptic than that. It's not that you don't believe anyone on this Bulls roster will ever become an All-Star, but rather the next All-Star for the Bulls is not on this team yet, meaning the Bulls will get an all-star via some sort of acquisition, whether it's through a trade or free agency, that isn't on this team yet. They will be the next all-star. And then years down the line, maybe Zach or Patrick Williams would get an all-star nod. But the next one to be selected as an all-star from the Bulls, as we know of them right now, won't be any of the guys on the current roster. So let me know if I have that right, if I'm interpreting what you're trying to say, or if in fact you are saying none of the current Bulls players will ever be selected to an all-star game. And then finally, the last take, we've got Javier Sanchez, who says, if the Bulls fail to make the 8th seed, everyone is gone except for Zach Lavine. So I would actually have to say it's likely the opposite. If the Bulls miss the playoffs this season, that's another, season of Zach failing to lead a team to the playoffs. Now, it's not all on him. The other players have to step up as well, but he is the best player on this team, the leader, and if the Bulls miss the playoffs, Zach is likely the first one to be considered in moving because his trade value is still high. Also, you said everyone is gone but Zach, and first of all, that actually can't happen because you can't just wipe out an entire roster and replace it with all new players. It just doesn't work that way. I will say that all players, with the exception of Patrick Williams, would be on the table for a trade if the Bulls do miss the playoffs, sure. Because this is the year that Arturas is using to assess the roster at hand that the former front office constructed, with the exception of Garrett Temple and Patrick Williams. And Williams, he's just too young, too much potential, and they invested a very high draft pick in him that he is really the only untouchable player at this point. So yeah, if the Bulls greatly underperform, there will be changes made, and it could be a lot of changes, but all of the players gone except for Lavine. No, first of all, it can't happen. It can't actually happen that way. And second, Lavine will not be an untouchable player if it does happen. That's all I've got for now, though, guys. There are some other hot takes, and I'll try to make a second video for some of the other ones later today, but I might not have time to do it. I know that I've said that the last 2 go-rounds, but this time it's probably unlikely. So this might be it for this week's edition of Wednesday Hot Takes, but I'll be back with more next week if you don't see a second upload. As always, guys, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan and you like daily Bulls content, including Bulls Hot Takes. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will catch you guys in the next one.